and hand over to Marion.
Thank you so much, Callum. As always, that was a good start to our AGM, and good evening and welcome to everyone who's come along this evening for the AGM. And a special welcome to our guest speaker, Fr Tony Lappin. That's great to see you there. I'm sure all of you want to hear Fr Tony. So we'll try to get through the business part of the meeting as swiftly as possible. But can we first go to our chaplain, Father John Convery, who will bring us together with reflection and prayer. So over to you, Father John.
Thank you, Marion, and a good evening and a welcome to everybody to our AGM for Pax Christi. I would just like to begin our gathering, first of all, by asking us to take a moment of quietness and to gather ourselves before our dialogue and conversation, and just to pray for peace, but more specifically at this private moment, peace in our hearts, bringing with us our own personal situations in life, and ask God to give us peace. And I begin with the words of Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium, number 239. The Church proclaims the gospel of peace, and she wishes to cooperate with all national and international authorities in safeguarding this immense universal good by preaching Jesus Christ, who is himself peace. The new evangelization calls on every baptized person to be a peacemaker and a credible witness to a reconciled life. Lord, I find it hard to believe it matters, the little mark I make on this world. I'm so caught up in things I can't control, can't even understand the problem half the time. I feel lost, swallowed up, my efforts useless. If I stand out in the storm, waving my little leaf of protest, it's quickly whipped away, wind-blighted, seared, and nothing seems to change. At times, I think I hear an echo of unpleasant laughter far away. I get the feeling there's nothing I can do, and not much point in trying. Yet, in the quiet, I still feel that inner sense of peace, which I can only say is you, urging me on, telling me, however small I am or weak, you care for what I do, reminding me so gently that however small a mark I may make, it's mine and yours, and telling me to do the little thing in front of me today. I may not see its cosmic breadth or deep significance, sounds pompous anyway, but in the faithful living out and quiet affirmation of this day's duty lies worth and joy. And on some wall, a mark is made, a mark of love, a mark of peace, shaped like a cross. And we ask God to be with us at this meeting, to make his mark on our efforts and work for peace. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Amen. And thank you so much, Father John, for that moving opening to our meeting this evening. So now can I welcome all our members and friends. Thank you for being with us. And thank you to our executive committee for all their support and hard work throughout the year. The papers for the meeting were circulated to members ahead of this evening, and I will send them out again to those who might well have missed them because they perhaps weren't members, and just to make sure everybody has what we've got. But I think that Callum can put them on the screen as we go. And so we're going to start off with the minutes of the 2021 AGM. And for those of you who were at that meeting, we would ask if that is a true representation of our meeting last year. So we can have just a brief look at that. So if people who were at the meeting can, what's the best thing, Callum, to have raised hands, or for people just...
If people can use the reactions button, so at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button that says reactions. If it's not there, obviously, you may need to tap the three dots with more and then reactions, and you could then give us a thumbs up or raise your hand if you have a question about it or anything to dispute.
So I'm just putting a thumbs up there from me.
And we have no raised hands. So I would say unanimously accepted.
Thank you very much. And I think that Rosalind is taking a minute of this year's. So so that's great. I would ask, do I need to, no, my thumb has obviously gone. Are there any matters arising from those minutes that anybody would like to ask about? Anything that is concerning anybody, or are we okay with that?
No raised hands.
No raised hands and some thumbs up. So that's good. Thank you very, very much. And I think then we're able to move on. So I would like to turn to my own report for the year. My report as chair, which was also sent out and which Callum will share. well, I don't think there's any need to share that at the moment, but I'm not going to go through it at length. There are items that I'd like to emphasize. Our online events, particularly, and our work with Police Scotland. I'd first of all like to thank all of the guest speakers who joined us from around the world and gave of their time and their expertise. We intend to continue these online events at which we aim to address the range of issues that concern our members and are at the heart of Pax Christi's ethos worldwide. Our work with Police Scotland grew out of our, well, I could call it successful campaign to end training in Sri Lanka, which we believed allowed that regime to whitewash their human rights record. And then we learned that Police Scotland had been working with police in Colombia, a country which was then governed by what I can only call a brutal regime, and its police force operating under the Ministry of Defence. In other words, a military operation. And we challenged Police Scotland, and Hugh Foy and I have entered into a dialogue with Police Scotland that we believe is useful. We've brought to our online meetings representatives from Justice for Colombia and peace activists in Colombia, some of whom are now in the new Colombian government, which has been, the election was in the summer, our summer, and they are making progress, quite slow progress, but that's to be expected after decades of the previous regime. And they're aiming to end the violence and reinstate human rights. But I think we have to keep an eye on that. So we've agreed to continue the dialogue, and we're pleased that the new Secretary General of Pax Christi International, Martha Inés Romero, who will take office in January, she'll also join our online meetings when she can. There are still issues about Police Scotland signing such contracts, about who Police Scotland's training academy is really answerable to, Holyrood or Westminster, and if there's a true understanding that such contracts can allow violent regimes to tick boxes on human rights and gender issues. We believe this is important, and we're going to stay with the issue. If there are any questions on that or any other issues mentioned in the report, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Perhaps, Callum, you could put that report up just now very briefly and let anybody who hasn't seen it make any comments. So we clearly have had a very busy year. We are small, but we keep boxing above our weight, if that's not the wrong metaphor to use for a peace organization. And as I said, I've listed those Zoom events that we've had since last November, and we really have been very fortunate in the people who have agreed to speak to us. And I do hope that my lucky streak continues in the year ahead. I will try my best to make sure that we do that. And I think that these are events that are of interest, not just to our members, but beyond that. So always share links with your own networks. We'll continue I noticed that we grow on Twitter with our followers. So if you're on Twitter, please follow us and share and whatever. And if you're on Facebook, do that too, because it's the way of getting the messages out. I thank very much our executive committee. I thank all of the members who have done so much over the past year, the letters you've written, the campaigns that you've joined in. There are those of you who have been on protests. There are those of you who've handed out leaflets. Thank you to everybody. And as I say, if there are any questions, and if Hugh wanted to say anything about the Police Scotland situation, I would welcome any comments that you had, Hugh.
Yeah, I think just to say it's been a different conversation because of the transition from the previous brutal regime to a democratically elected progressive government. And so the opportunity here is to take our lead from human rights activists in Colombia, telling us what the need is moving forward. It would have been a simpler campaign strategy in some ways to do exactly what we did previously in the Colombian context, but there may actually be an opportunity here for NGOs, and particularly with Pax Christi having a presence at the UN, to try and shift this space where actually Police Scotland may be useful. However, we need to be very exact, we need to be very challenging, and I think if by March there's no transition and the government are struggling, then we would need to ask ourselves whether we were in danger of continuing the whitewashing of the previous regime and not contributing to a human rights model of policing. So it's complicated work, but I think at the moment we're in the right place, doing the right things, and we just need to be prayerfully discerning about how we inhabit these spaces moving forward.
Thank you, Hugh, and thank you for being there at these meetings, because we're usually outnumbered by Police Scotland, so it's good to have people on our side. And I noticed that Rosalind says in the chat that about our events, that it's good that we can view them later on the website if you're not able to see those attend those events at the time. And of course, you'll find not just those events on our website, but blogs and the newsletters and all the rest of what we do. So if you're not members, do have a look at the website, because there's a load of stuff there. So that's my report. That's where we're at the moment. And thank you, Duncan, for those congratulations. Everybody, all the members, all the executive committee, everybody has done such a huge amount over the past year that I sometimes can't believe it when I try to look to get this kind of thing together. So thanks to everybody for all your hard work. And we can now turn to Grace Buckley for her Treasurer's report. And I think that Callum has got there the Excel spreadsheet thing. So over to you, Grace.
Right, so that's me unmuted, I hope. They're not complicated accounts to explain. We really only have at the present time two sources of income. One is membership fees and the other is donations. And on the expenditure side, not a lot either. We have our annual fees to Pax Christi International, and I'll come back to those in a minute. We have our bank fees, which are exactly the same as last year. We pay £18 a quarter to the bank. This year, we managed to get Chris to accept the payment for hosting the website. There was a fee for that of £115. And the exec agreed that we would give a donation to Abdel Fattah al-Busrour for his charity, which was to help people celebrate Ramadan with dignity. The end result of all of these bits and pieces coming and going was that we have about £160 more in the account than we had last year. We're not here to make money. That's why we keep the fees as low as we can. We just want to cover our costs. And I've got to say again, as I said last year, and as I say in my report, thanks to Marion, that we can have these wonderful events at pretty well no cost. And that's great to see. The only problem it causes me is when I talk to Pax Christi International, because of all the work she does, also working with them, they think that we're huge and therefore we could probably give them more money. They're having their own problems at the present time financially, like almost any other organisation I know that's international. And they asked for a chat about whether we could pay them any more. And I said, oh, perfectly frank, if you go into a percentage of membership fees and other money that comes in, you won't be even getting as much as you currently get. So I don't think that's a good idea. We will be as supportive as we can, but our primary aim in the long term, I suspect, is that we're here to spread the word and not to fundraise. We're not set up to do that. So I think they sort of grudgingly accepted that, and I've heard no more since as to what they're thinking to do. So not a lot other than that to report, and just to say to people, if you haven't already paid your fees for the new year, we'll be happy to receive them, either by cheque if necessary, although it causes Marion problems getting them into the bank, or straight to the bank account, or through our website. And if there's any questions, I will try to answer them.
And there's a question from Anne-Marie. You should see the option to unmute.
Hi, thank you. Just when you were saying there about membership fees, so I think I paid mine about 6 months ago. So would I get, is there like a time where you would want that renewed, or would I get like a reminder that it's been a year, or yeah, how does that work, or what would be best for me to do?
That's always a tricky one, because when I was used to be treasurer in another organisation, we used to do it in percentages. If you joined in the first quarter, second quarter, or whatever, you paid a certain amount. It's too tricky to handle it that way. I think we just say, so long as you pay within the next 12 months, I will be happy with that. Marion might not agree, but that'll do for me.
I agree totally. I think that if people can, in fact, I'm almost sure that the website does an annual thing and reminds people, but if not, if you can keep an eye on when you actually paid your dues. A lot of people who joined at the beginning, their dues are in November. Is that not right, Grace? The majority of people,
yeah, the majority is some cause, as I think I said in the report, some cause confusion because they paid in October, so they wouldn't forget in November. So you've got some where the payment actually turns up in the financial year before, but it's for the following year. So the majority of people pay October, November, and then I see bits coming in between. So I'm not going to break my heart for the sake of £10 if you pay halfway through the year, if that's how you joined. So I hope that's okay for you. Yes, Marion.
As far as checks are concerned, you said it causes me problems. It means I have to take a 30-mile drive up the road to Oban, because that's the only bank that will take our ethical banking system checks. But I don't care. If there are people who are operating with checks, then I can do with a day out to Oban anytime. So thank you.
Okay. But as Marion has been subtly saying, it's much easier if you do it online, or if you send it direct by bank transfer to the account details which I've given you. Any other questions? Okay. Back to you, Marion.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Grace, for again more hard work that you put in to make all of that happen. And I think we now move on to the item where I say that at we've got a proposal to make to you now. At the 2020 meeting, the executive committee was elected for a 4-year period. In 2021, last year, Callum Timms, our wonderful Callum, he doesn't just do this, you know, he does an awful lot more, but my goodness, I'm so glad he does this. Callum was co-opted to the executive committee, and he would also serve that period of office. So we've now approached Pax Christi member Anne Dobbing to join the executive committee to serve from 22 to 26 with your approval. Like Callum, Anne will be an absolutely terrific addition to the executive. She's already contributed so much through campaigns and protests that she's engaged in, and then contributions made to our newsletters and blogs. She's just moved to the mainland, and I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, Anne, but you may want to say a few words, and then we'll ask everyone if there are any objections to you joining our little happy band or on the executive committee. Anne, anything that you would like to say?
I'm very honoured to be asked, Marianne, and I will promise to do my absolute best to support Pax Christi in, you know, through that period. I'm not entirely 100% sure what the journey will involve, but I think it's a very worthwhile thing to do. So, you know, hopefully you'll be able to use me, and I'll be able to contribute and support Pax Christi's work. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Listen, from day to day, I don't think we know what we're doing, so don't worry about that. It's a very exciting journey, and I'm very, very pleased that you've agreed to come onto the committee. Is there anybody who has any objections? I don't see that anybody would do that. Callum, have we got anybody that doesn't think this is a really, really, really good idea?
No hands. There were a few thumbs up and a few applauses.
I'm very pleased about that. So yes, thank you, Anne, and welcome, welcome aboard. That's great. Thank you. So is there any other business? Does anybody got anything that they'd like to raise at this point?
No hands.
Okay, well, we've actually gone through the business part of our meeting quicker than I thought that we might do, because you never know with these things. So I had said we would have a break at 7:45 to 8 o'clock before we welcome Fr Tony, but I think that we now have a short break. If we could all perhaps have the comfort stop and come back for 7:45, how would that be? And then just switch off your mics and your videos, and we'll be back at 1:45 and on to the interesting part of the meeting. Not that the beginning hasn't been of great value. So how does that sound to people? We'll come back at 1:45, okay? Thank you. And I will hang around here so that if anybody wanted to ask any questions or to enter into any conversations, then just give me Father Tony, I've just sent you a wee message saying that you can do the screen share if you like, or Callum can. Well, people, it's now 7:45, and that's when we said we would get back. Has everybody made a return, Callum?
A few cameras popping back on, so from what I can see.
Okay. Well, from a wet and windy corner of Argyll, you're all welcome back. Are you in a wet and windy corner of Argyll as well, Duncan? Yeah. It got better as the day went on, but not a lot. So, can I welcome you all back to this second part of our event, the part that I'm quite sure most of you were signed up for, because we're going to introduce our guest speaker at this point. But first of all, I'd like to share with you our Pax Christi Scotland prayer, which was written by Executive Committee member Hugh Foy and is available in printed form for your parishes if you'd like to email me and ask me for a bundle. I'm most willing to send those on to you. You're probably saying, I've already got some, but you can never have enough. So let's just gather our thoughts again and say that special prayer. Lord God, fill our minds with your wisdom, fill our hearts with your love, and guide our words and actions, that we might become the living presence of your peace. Bless our homelands, that we might witness to your transforming universal call to justice and inspire all that we do in and with your whole human family to protect and nurture all of your creation. Place within us the mind of servants, that we might build and nurture a world without violence in the building of your kingdom of love, justice, and peace. Amen. And so we turn to Father Tony Lappin for a presentation that he has called Living Our Faith in Scotland, the Challenges and Opportunities of Journeying Together. And I think that that's a very evocative title that I think that we're all looking forward to hearing this. Father Tony is a priest of the Archdiocese of St Andrews and Edinburgh, currently serving the parish of St Joseph's, Peebles and Innerleithen. He's also a priest member of the Commission for Caritas, Justice and Peace within the Archdiocese of St Andrews and Edinburgh, with specific responsibility for SPREAD. That's the Special Religious Development Organisation. Now, before his ordination, Father Tony spent a quarter of a century, he doesn't look that old, does he? Yeah. In social work and education. He's a registered psychotherapist, and part of his work today is as a nominated psychological expert with the Scottish Interdiocesan Tribunal. Each diocese in Scotland faces its own challenges in coming together with our brothers and sisters from other denominations and other faiths. There are also huge opportunities to create a world in which we're genuinely brothers and sisters, as Pope Francis suggests in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti. Father Tony will explore those challenges and opportunities and engage us all in a Q&A session. Now, don't forget to put any questions in the chat, as if you're anything like me, you'll forget when you come to that part of the business. So put your questions or your comments in the chat, but let's go over now to Father Tony, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks very much, Marion. It's great to be with you and have the opportunity to share this I think a really important kind of subject. I'm going to share my screen, make sure that you can actually see it. Are you seeing that now?
Yes.
Yep. Yep, we're on. That's great. Super. Okay, I was asked to look at the whole issue of sectarianism. I suppose to understand what that subject really is, or some of it, we won't understand all of it, but to understand some of the issues around that, and to look at some of the work that's been done both by the Scottish Government and also other organisations over the while, and to be thinking about what can we do as a church and as our own faith communities to work towards, I suppose, a greater sense of peace and a greater sense of kind of coming together. So I thought that what I would do, let's see, why is that not? Oh, here we are. So what I thought we'd do is obviously just have a look at the actual issue itself and talk a wee bit about that. Have a look at the Scottish Government report that I refer to. It goes back to 2015, but some of the issues that have been identified in that are very helpful. And really kind of looking at what their recommendations are as we move forward as a country. And then to bring just a couple of personal experiences, my own personal experience of growing up in the 70s and 80s, well, 60s, 70s and 80s, and what I kind of learned from very basic kind of personal experience. And hopefully that might spark some things in you about what has been, you know, how have you been formed in terms of your identity as a Catholic or otherwise, and how have you related to other people? What have been the kind of explicit kind of aspects to development, but also what have been the kind of hidden ones, the kind of almost the subconscious messages that we've been given. And then to look at the way forward, and part of that will be looking at other countries, but also thinking about those recommendations from the Scottish Government report and thinking about what we can take responsibility for, both individually and also in our church. So first of all, I think it's really important when there's any issue that we have that's of concern, the first thing really is that we must face up to the reality of that. And, you know, I think some people would say in Scotland even today, oh, well, yes, that was a problem in the past, but it's all fine now and we can just get on with each other. And hopefully that's what we can aim to do. But I think like anything that is of difficulty, facing up to it is important. And I think we have to accept that sectarianism in Scotland is a reality still today. Now, it might not be as extreme or acute as it maybe was in different aspects before, but it's still there. And I think when we talk about sectarianism, we talk about rivalries, kind of prejudices and stereotypes that kind of fuel that and kind of still give it life. And of course, that all leads to what we would understand, a misunderstanding and mistrust, and very often a sense of irrationality. That very often people come with beliefs and perceptions that actually are not based in reality, but they accept them as reality, and that irrationality can be difficult. Obviously, our history plays a big part in that, and I think when we look at our own Catholic history in Scotland. I mean, we can go way back to the Reformation, and certainly we're not going to go through all that tonight, because we could be here all night or be here for weeks on end. But, you know, there is that kind of sense of difference, there is that sense of identity, there is that sense of being dealt with differently, of injustice and unfairness. And, you know, that's then, you know, continued on through in various ways and various guises. So our history is important, and I think we need to understand it and come to terms with that before there can be that sense of healing, that sense of peace with it all. And I think understanding our human nature also is really important, because as people, we like to think that we're very sophisticated, and in many ways we are, but we're also people of patterns and cycles. You know, we tend to focus on difference, and that somehow gives us a sense of identity. You know, we go into groups and we feel quite comfortable and quite secure in our groups. And while that can be helpful in some levels, because identity is important, it can also then also fuel that kind of challenge when we're engaging with other groups or with people and groups that we consider to be different than ourselves. So I think these are quite important issues in what I've called facing up to the reality. Now, the Scottish Government report that I've kind of referred to is entitled Tackling Sectarianism and Its Consequences in Scotland. And it's the result of a kind of advisory group's work that was published in April 2015. And the quote from the report, I think, is helpful, that sectarianism in Scotland is a mixture of perceptions, attitudes, actions, and structures that involves overlooking, excluding, discriminating against, or being abusive or violent towards others on the basis of their perceived Christian denominational background. This perception is always mixed with other factors, such as, but not confined to, politics, football allegiance, and national identity. So when we look at, you know, that statement, we can identify, you know, the kind of perceptions and attitudes that kind of underpin this sense of difference, and what can fuel sectarianism, resulting in abuse and violence. We see it still quite powerfully in our football in Scotland. Now, I'm not a great football fan or a great football supporter, but if you go to Parkhead, or you go to Ibrox, or even some other football games, we see that kind of real fueling of aggression and anger, and that sense of history, whether it's accurate or whether it's perceived in many ways. But there's almost a kind of justification, you know, for the various kind of positions. And football clubs have done a lot in last few years to try and resolve this or address it, but of course it's still there. We also see it in politics, and particularly in national identity. And I think when we look at the issue of Scottish independence, now whether you are supportive of Scottish independence, or you're supportive of the kind of connection with the UK, it really doesn't matter. But what we see very often is that an identity with Catholicism very often is kind of seen as about separatist and what others might say, and that sense of supporting independence. Whereas certainly from a more kind of Protestant kind of perspective, then kind of wanting to stay with the Union is important from Union's perspective. Now that's not. Of course, there are some Catholics who want to stay in the Union, and there will be some Protestants who want independence. But I think what this is kind of saying is that sectarianism is rooted in so many of the things that we see, and that will influence our behaviour and influence our ways of looking. So again, kind of understanding that for us is really important. And again, for us to challenge ourselves, to be thinking, how do I allow that to influence me in all the kind of various things that my life involves? So the Scottish Government report highlights a number of things, and I've picked out a few of those things that I thought were quite helpful in helping us understand the issue and helping us to look forward to the future. It identifies attitudes and behaviours which justify abuse, anger, aggression, and violence. So I would say that any attitudes and behaviours which justify, that obviously are rooted in irrationality and whatever else, because I think deep down, we all want a sense of peace. We all want to be able to be living in a world of unity and getting on with one another. But we see a lot of abuse and anger and aggression in our country at times. So starting to identify what are those attitudes and behaviours that need to be addressed. The report says that sectarianism is widespread and worrisome. So I think it's a serious issue. It's an issue that we do need to grasp and continue to look at. And I don't think it's an issue that we can resolve overnight, or we put a set of policies and procedures in place and somehow that will change. There's a whole range at different levels that we need to be kind of looking at, but recognising that it is widespread and worrisome. Although also what the report says is that, that sectarianism is in pockets of Scottish life. There's limited evidence of it being in structural disadvantage between key religious groups. And what it says is that minority of Scots report being victims historically or recently. So it's not that everyone would say that they have an experience of sectarianism. They might have viewed it, they might have seen it on television, but in terms of their own personal experience, it's only a minority of Scots that would actually say that they have been affected by it. Also, it's not restricted to any particular religious or ethnic group. And so it seems to be, for me, a kind of aspect almost of our human nature. And I think going back to that sense and our need for identity. And I think that's something to bear in mind. There's also, in recent years, considerable evidence of social integration between Protestants and Catholics. So where maybe 30, 40, 60, 80 years ago, where that maybe just would not have been taking place, that there has been progress in that whole issue, so that there is evidence of the Christian denominations working together. And I would certainly know that in this town here in Peebles, where I am, there's a huge connection among the Christian churches and with the community generally, where the churches take a lead on many things, and that is, hugely ecumenical. The report says there's little evidence at the heart of Scottish politics that Scottish politics is not influenced by sectarianism. I'm sure there might be little bits and pieces there, but that's certainly that's one of the findings. And this is, I think, quite important for people, is that where it is experienced, it can lead to trauma and the consequences of trauma. Now, we've become in more recent years really aware of trauma from various perspectives, so we talk about post-traumatic stress. We understand people who've maybe been involved in the armed forces, or people who have been experienced a serious accident. Certainly people who have been abused sexually and physically. Children experience trauma in that. But for those who have had quite a difficult experience from a sectarian point of view, whether that be abuse verbally or physically, whether that be an assault, quite serious situation, or whether that be a prolonged kind of situation with neighbours or with a particular group at work or whatever, that can have an effect, can have a traumatic effect. And of course, that then affects people's lives at every level, because when we experience trauma, our whole understanding of self and other people in the world can be really kind of badly affected. So quite helpful kind of points from this report to kind of give us a kind of sense and to put it into perspective and to give us a sense of balance with it all. So it's not that every day that we have these, that the majority of people are experiencing sectarianism, but minority are. When it does happen, it can be pretty serious. What the government report talks about is that there needs to be a set of values that are shared, that are developed in terms of our communities, in terms of our organisations. So a set of values for Scotland about how we live, that we're able to agree those and work towards them. It talks about the importance of research, academic research, to be looking at where there are instances and systemic kind of aspects to sectarianism, but also where progress is made and why it's made and what's effective in making the change. It talks about everyone, both individually and from an organisational point of view, taking responsibility for the issue. So it's not just about the government's responsibility, or it's not just about the church's responsibility. It's actually everyone's responsibility. And we need to challenge ourselves on that. Again, it talks about history. And I think I would agree that completely that we need to understand our history and to come to terms with that before there can be true healing. And I think that's for the both sides of the divide. And then from that research and from our ongoing work, kind of building up evidence of good practice and ways in which kind of progress can be made. And of course, the most important thing is about how we develop our communities. What are the influences in our communities that we would want to put there? And what the Scottish Government report says is that for each of these things, that all these other organisations need to be responsible and take part in and play an active role in bringing this about. So churches, first and foremost, of course, really important about what we do and what we say. And, you know, when we think about our churches, there can still be messages that we have about, you know, being Catholic. And, you know, we've got the St Margaret Agreement with the Church of Scotland, which is a wonderful development. And that's all good from a kind of PR perspective and a kind of working document for us to be there. But within our parishes, we will know at times there can be messages about difference and something that can, you know, fuel that lack of unity or disunity. So really being clear about, you know, where we stand, and yes, our own identity is important, and it's not about you know, kind of undermining that in any way, but it's also about being really mindful about the messages we give and the effect that has on others. Football, obviously, major part to play, and as I said earlier, most of the football clubs have, particularly Celtic and Rangers in Scotland, have done a lot and put a lot of money and resources into trying to resolve that, but there's a lot more to go there. Looking at marches and parades from both sides of the perspective. So, you know, Orange Lodge marches in Scotland, how they're managed, how they're, you know, the kind of the values and the responsibility that has to be taken by them about how they're conducted. But also, you know, from our own perspective, you know, the kind of Green Brigade marches and whatever else, maybe not as numerous as Orange Lodge marches, certainly not in the west of Scotland, but you know, still, again, responsible for it. Yes, identity is important. Living out that is important, but at the same time, we need to be mindful about how that can kind of undermine peace in a sense. COSLA and local authorities, really important, that local authorities in their planning and their understanding and the messages that they give, important to keep this whole issue in mind. Education Scotland, when they're looking at proposing to schools in Scotland different things for the curriculum and whatever else, but then also in their inspection processes, making sure that this issue is addressed and is being effective in terms of young people and their development. In the media, particularly in social media, we know that social media can be a very explosive kind of place, and very often you know, emotions are heightened there and people kind of spout off various things and whatever, sometimes irresponsibly, but really important that we're mindful of that and to use media, particularly social media, in a helpful way, in a way that starts to talk about these shared values and be able to help that development of community cohesion. Youth and community projects with young people, also the justice system, you know, how the justice system deals with this and understands this. There has been, you know, the kind of hate laws and whatever else. Some would say that they're not all that effective, but some would say, well, it's a development and we're moving in the right direction. So kind of looking at what are the consequences when people don't engage with this change process and are hell-bent on causing difficulty. How is that dealt with through the law and the justice system? And of course, then Scottish Government and Scottish Parliament have a role in all of that, in managing that, coordinating that, and proposing ways forward. So a lot for us to think about in there, but you know, certainly from our point of view, an important thing for us is to take responsibility that we have to try and do the very best within our communities and how we engage with others. I wanted to share just a couple of personal experiences. There's 2 or 3 here. I might just only use 1 or 2, but I grew up in Lone Heads in Midlothian, in a Catholic family. My parents were, were kind of practicing Catholics, so very committed to the church, and our parish was the kind of focus of a lot of kind of social activities and whatever else. So our identity as a parish and being Catholic was quite strong. Now, I wouldn't have said that my parents were at all sectarian in any sense, and would have been probably the opposite in from the surface point of view. But in our community, we had St Margaret's Primary School, which was a Catholic school, and we had what we called the Protestant school, of course, non-denominational. And there was that sense from the very beginning of difference. We had an identity as Catholics, and I'm sure they had an identity as, not non-Catholics or whatever they might have thought. And I think there was a lot of suspicion, because there used to be a lot of, I remember, kind of growing up when I was 6, 7 and 8 and 9, of, this other school and these other people, and thought of them as being quite, kind of dangerous. And there would be occasional fights. There would be fights arranged, between the two schools. I have to say, I never took part in that, not because, just because I'd be a scaredy and I'd have to run away. But that whole kind of thing went on, and I'm sure people would recognise this in their own communities. But when I looked at the influences for me, my dad was a very strong Celtic supporter. Now, he was the most mild-mannered man. He was a lovely man, and as I say, not at all. I wouldn't have thought bigoted. But my goodness, if Celtic and Rangers were playing, he would be really animated. And I think as a young boy, I would have picked up on that. And that whole sense of just that unconscious development into an identity, which saw what I was, but also viewed others as other, and as other suspiciously. So that was really important, and that kind of went on for quite some time. However, the second aspect to that was that we had a parish priest that was quite forward thinking, and the local Church of Scotland minister at the time, they got on very well together, the priest and the minister. And we didn't have Cubs or Scouts or anything like that in the parish. The Church of Scotland had the Boys Brigade, and we were invited to join the Boys Brigade. And I did that with a number of my other friends from St Margaret's Primary. And suddenly we were in joint activities and spending time with these boys that we had been great suspicion of, and were quite afraid of. And through time, very quickly, there was a change of focus. Because we were all in the BBs together, there was a common identity developing there, which kind of undermined that kind of difficulty that had been. And through time, a change in perception and belief, and then also a change in behaviour. And so these people then became friends rather than others to be afraid of or to be suspicious about. That's quite important for me. Now, I'm sure for each one of us, we will have had similar, that might seem quite straightforward and quite simple, but think about in your own life, what were the influences on you in your Catholic identity and how you saw others? And were there any experiences you had about coming together with people so that would change behaviour and whatever? Because I think when we see this at the very, kind of micro level, then there's something there about what can happen at the macro level. I won't go into this, that would take a wee bit too long. So the way forward, just another couple of minutes, we need to look to other communities. And I suppose nearest to us is Northern Ireland. And for many decades, there was a lot of violence and a lot of loss of life, and a very bloody and a very unfair situation within all of that. And we could again spend a lot of time kind of going through that. But Northern Ireland has done a lot of work, and it has moved from a real kind of dominance of violence and bloodshed to a strong focus on peace. And that change has been through peaceful means. The violence didn't actually achieve very much. What actually brought about peace was people coming together and to look at understanding their differences, understanding their history, but looking at shared values and looking at what both sides could actually subscribe to. And from those peaceful means, then being able to bring about change. And of course, now there are many, many initiatives throughout Northern Ireland, but particularly Belfast and Londonderry or Derry, whatever else, of bringing young people together. They see the future of young people coming together in many ways, a bit like us in the Boys Brigade, but bringing young people together so that they are friends together, And yes, they understand their differences, but there is that sense of connection. Developing that sense of value and respect for difference, but the most important thing about finding common ground. And I think there's a lesson for us in that, that we really want to be kind of looking at unity in diversity, not unity in uniformity. So again, very briefly, as a priest, I work very effectively with other Christian churches and faiths. Pope Francis has had a big focus on dialogue with Judaism and Islam. Nationally here, we've had the St. Margaret's Declaration, where our Archbishop has signed an agreement with the Church of Scotland, the moderator, which is looking at our friendship together and formalising that and seeing us walking together. But we must acknowledge the past, the hurt, the pain and the difficulty. And then we can look forward to newness of life in the future. If we don't acknowledge the past and the pain and the hurt, that will always be there. And any development that we try to make without acknowledging that will always be undermined by those things under the surface that will hold us back. So the question, I think, for us is, what can we do? And I'm not going to give you any answers to that. That's for you to think about. Given what we understand from the report from Scottish Government, what we might understand from our own humanity, what we might understand from our own identity, but also thinking about a Scotland that we would like to subscribe to, what can we do? So for me, it's common ground, and it is that unity and diversity. So the last word has to, of course, go to our Lord. And the final thought really is, I suppose, from John chapter 17, where he says, Father, may they be one as you and I are one. Now, I went to New Dawn conference a number of years ago, and there was a keynote speaker, a Church of Scotland minister, a man called Colin Syme, who was giving a talk, and it was about unity. And there was one thing that he said that really, really hit home to me, and it stayed with me ever since. Very often, we think that prayer is about making everybody Catholic or bringing everybody together into one Christian church. And while on one level we might want that, and that might be ideal, what Colin was saying was, when you think about that prayer that the Lord gave in terms of unity to the Father, may they be one as you and I are one. He said, in the persons of the Trinity, the Father and the Son are different. They are not the same. They share the same essence. Their essence is love. But the Father is not the Son, and the Son is not the Father, but they share the essence of love through the power of the Holy Spirit. Now, if we take that to think about our own sense of unity, now I'm hoping that I wouldn't get burnt at the stake in Gillis Centre for saying this, but when we think about other Christian churches, that they are different to us and we are different to them, perhaps in the way that the Father and the Son are different. But what needs to join us together is love. And if we are joined together in love and share values and share a particular way of trying to live, then perhaps we have more unity than we think. So that's my talk. If anybody wants to present any questions, more than happy to take those from you.
Thank you so much. That has given us an awful lot to think about, and I'm just going to chicken out here and hand over to Callum, Callum, there's some wonderful stuff in the chat there. Over to you, and it's not just questions but discussion points as well. So thank you, and Callum, it's you and Father Tony and that chat box.
Thanks, Marion, and thank you, Tony, for taking us through what can be a very sensitive issue around which there's been so much discussion in recent years. So I'm going to turn straight to the chat because it is, as Marion says, already very rich. And I noticed quite a lot popping up during the course of your talk. But I want to turn to Grace's question first, not just because it was the first question to come through to me, but also because of the kind of direction that it takes us in. And Grace is asking, do you think that politicians sometimes use sectarianism as an excuse to push religion out of the public sphere?
Wow, some may do. I think when we think about the world generally, you know, I think religion is, for some people, it's become a real issue. I think for many years it has, you know, we can be a real challenge to governments and a real challenge to authority. So yes, there may be, that may be in some quarters, but I don't think that would then say that, you know, there isn't, that the sectarian isn't alive, you know, that it is. I think what we've got to do to undermine any attempts to kind of push religion out is to show that we can actually be people of love and not people of, you know, of disunity and all that comes from that. So, you know, I think when we think of the Lord's Prayer about may they be one as you and I are one, then that's about being people of love. And I think I would be as bold to say that if we as followers of Jesus in different denominations cause a lot of difficulty, then perhaps we should be pushed out, because actually we're meant to be a power for good and a power for love in the world. We're meant to actually bring a good news. So where we are doing that and whatever, and then there is a challenge to authority, well, of course, then we're doing what's right, and we will always be persecuted, we always will be challenged. But sometimes we can shoot ourselves in the foot. And I think it's about understanding some of the stuff that fuels all of that and to overcome that so that we can actually really connect in love and be a powerful force for good.
Maybe sticking with that theme though, from kind of political dialogue to dialogue and language more generally,
yeah.
How important is language in the debate? You know, the UN today is talking about saying no to hate speech. Thinking about the kind of how that can be taught and influenced, how important do you think the use of language is in this discussion?
I think the use of language is really, really important. And I think we should think about how we say things. Sometimes we've got to say difficult things, but sometimes it's about how we say those difficult things. So it's not about not saying the difficult things, because I think if we avoid that, then we then just try to find kind of common ground that's fairly superficial. Sometimes we do need to get into the difficult stuff, but how we do that is important, and the language we use. And I think it always has to be based on respect of the other and acceptance and valuing the other for the other, because the other has a perspective and that's valuable and worthwhile. And I think if we are able to do that more and more, we can also be hopefully valued in our perspective in sharing that. And I think that's probably played out really importantly when you think about what's happening in Glasgow at times in the Orange Order and the Catholic Church and the local authorities in looking at marches and that kind of thing. There will be difficult things spoken about, but if we can move to what, rather than us and them and a huge divide and lots of abusive language, we can find, okay, well, what is our identity? What are we trying to do? How do we, even though we don't agree with each other's position, how do we respect that and find a way of talking about that can then allow us still to do what we do, but move forward.
And just in between points here, Tony, I'll just invite everybody to continue to put your questions in. There is a richness of questions already there, but please, as we're having this discussion, continue to add your thoughts and your questions there. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction now and maybe pull a couple of questions together. Do you think, first of all, that sectarianism, and maybe in particular in the Scottish context, is predominantly a male issue? And to tie in with that, to look at another kind of comment and question which looks at the work of Tom Devine, who insists that the research shows sectarianism is only alive and well among young football fans in the kind of west of Scotland in a predominantly male audience. So is the issue kind of stemming from that football dialogue, and is it an issue predominantly affecting young men?
Those are interesting questions, and I don't have the answers to that. I think probably, I think from the football perspective, I mean, it's certainly there. We know it's there. We can see it there. But there are other areas in our society where we do see that. So we've got organisations such as Masonic Lodge. We've got organisations such as some of our Catholic groups, and whether or not they would say that, neither would say they're exclusive. There is that kind of sense of identity, and I'm wondering how much in those groups and in those that there is a real kind of commitment to be thinking about the other, because as I said earlier, in our human condition, we do like to have a sense of security and identity in groups that we're in. And I would say that even in our parishes, sometimes there will be that kind of underlying unconscious thing about others. And I think the more that we can try and work with others and spend time with others, engage with others, that can go. So I think Tom Devine, who am I to disagree with Tom Devine, but I would say that yeah, okay, football fans in the west of Scotland, it's definitely there and maybe very overtly there, but I don't think it's just limited to that. It will be interesting to see what happens with women's football as we move forward, to answer the other question, because I think there are different ways that men and women deal with emotion. And I think in football, very often, I think it can be an outlet. It's kind of an accepted outlet, that can go and scream and shout and whatever else. And that if Celtic Rangers are playing, then there's that sectarian aspect to it. I'm wondering if that happens, among kind of female supporters and whatnot generally. I'm not sure. I think women deal with emotions probably much better than men, and kind of process them differently. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure with all of that. I think when the report in 2015 spoke about research and trying to get evidence, then those would be great areas to kind of look at and to see where that lies.
I'm conscious, kind of building on what Tom Devine has said, that friends and colleagues that I've worked with and know from kind of more local institutions speak a lot about the fact that Scotland has a particularly almost peculiar brand of sectarianism, as it were, which is quite different to anywhere else in the world. Is that something that you would recognise? Yeah, I mean, I think, but there are probably lots of factors for that. That contribute to that. One is, as I said, going back to the Reformation and looking at Catholics and Protestants and how we treated each other. I think Catholics, would very much be of the view that we were, kind of unfairly treated at that stage. We weren't, we weren't given our place. That we were actually illegal at some points. And we think about John Ogilvie being martyred because it was illegal to, to be a priest, and also all of those things. Now, okay, that's a long time ago, but I think understanding our history and then thinking about, maybe our grandparents or great-grandparents who struggled to get a job, people who came over from Ireland who were Catholic, trying to, find their place in this country and had great difficulty. So there was a lot of what we might say abuse and a lot of difficulty and a lot of violence, and that's all part of our understanding. And that's why I kind of said it's really important to understand our history, to accept it, and to then start to work through that before we can then, continue to move on. So I think there's part of that, part of the actual history of Catholics and Protestants in Scotland. But there's also our own culture as well, our own Scottish culture that fits into. Yeah, I mean, so there probably is a particular brand, but I think wherever you went, it might not be as strong, but there will probably be some senses of that elsewhere. But I think, I think that yeah, I mean, if you look at the West of Scotland, I lived in the West of Scotland for a long time before I became a priest, and it's a wonderful place, very friendly place, Glasgow and surrounding areas, and everybody gets on. But when it comes to an Old Firm game, or when it comes to there really is a tension. There are areas that I wouldn't have driven through or walked through on an Old Firm game. Be quite honest with that. So there's something there in the DNA, if you like, that kind of comes to the surface that is problematic. Yeah. So yeah. Perhaps I could push you for a quick response on my next question, and then I'll change tack a wee bit. But you mentioned there the importance of understanding history. Do you think history is well understood?
I think it can be explored more objectively. I think that it's quite difficult to really understand history really well, because everybody writes history from their own perspective and wants their perspective to be kind of furthered. But I think that's part of what was one of the areas that the Scottish Government report spoke about, was understanding history and seeing it and visiting it and recognising it. So I think rather than having a kind of less than accurate view of history, trying to actually find, what did happen, why did it happen, and where do we want to move to, and what do we need to do, and what needs to be put to bed in order to move forward, I think is important. I don't think we can move forward properly unless we do that. So is history really understood? I would say it's limited. from our own perspective, but perhaps there should be an effort to try and make that more objective and understand that, but particularly also the history from other people, you know, from other denominations as well. So it's not just about our own history. We can become quite rooted in that, but I think we can say, yeah, this was there. Why was it there? What was it really all about? Because if we actually go back to the Reformation, we've got to ask the questions, why did the Reformation happen in the first place? So perhaps there's some responsibility we've got to take for that too. So thinking about all of that, it's not easy, it's a complex issue.
And we'll limit our scope tonight, and we'll avoid going back to the Reformations, because we could be here for a week at least. I'm going to turn to quite a broad question now, but if you indulge me, I'll kind of go through the different parts of it. Is there a danger that sectarianism in itself is a word that can be abused at times because it forces a narrative of equality of responsibility on those who are oppressing and those who are oppressed? How do we, the questioner asks, continue to name and remember the victims of this oppression, for example, caused by anti-Catholic and anti-Irish hate, whilst looking to see how we can look deeply at the current context, removing that othering that exists within the Catholic community? So how can we address it? First of all, do you think that there is a problem with the word and the kind of shared responsibility it creates? And then how do we kind of name what's really going on?
Yeah, the word is not, the word is just a word. It kind of describes what's there, but there's a lot of emotion goes around that, because immediately you think, you know, people can think like sectarianism, what side am I on this, and you know, and the other is the other, and you know, and that whole kind of sense of identity and unconscious stuff that comes to the fore in all of that. So yes, I mean, I think it is a difficult word to use, but what other word would we use? I mean, that's how we describe that whole kind of process. I think the questioner there saying, talking about the kind of victims of this, and I think that's a really important thing for us to think about, because you know, for people, as I said, you know, if you've been experiencing sectarianism over a long period of time, or a pretty traumatic event, and you're experiencing trauma from that changes your life. So for most people, they might just see sectarianism from a distance, and yes, it's an issue for us to deal with. But for someone who, you know, has been a victim of that in a serious way, then that will have affected their lives. So for me, it is about kind of, I mean, I go back to just what I kind of said earlier about understanding the history, understanding where we're at just now, but also thinking about where we want to go and what we need to do about that. But the healing aspect of it all is what's important. And I think the Scottish Government's kind of report was very helpful in that it did actually try to look at the various aspects that's involved and try to break that down. And it's balanced between understanding the past and looking at the real evidence about, you know, what's the extent of it, how does it take place, and what can be done to then move forward, and then to continue to look at evidence to try and, you know, think about, right, what is working and how do we further that. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but you know, I think that yes, the word is difficult, but it's a difficult subject. And I think it's, you know, like other issues that are very difficult, as soon as you mention a name, it brings up so many emotions, so many perceptions, and, you know, goes back to that whole thing about what we believe and then the consequences of our beliefs. So it has to be about change. It has to be about challenging those if we are to move forward.
Tony, do you think there's evidence from, for example, the Northern Irish context that it could be a generational problem?
I think so. Well, I think so. I mean, there isn't. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, I went on a long weekend to Belfast, and I went on a walking tour, a 4-hour walking tour around Belfast, and it was fascinating. We started off at Crumlin Road Jail, and the first 2 hours we were with a guy who'd been a prisoner. He'd been a unionist prisoner. He had committed a serious offence. He didn't tell us what it was, but he'd spent a long time in prison. And so he took us all around the Shankill Road area and spoke about the troubles from the Protestant perspective and raised a number of issues and, you know, what the IRA had done and all the various kind of things. And then at the Peace Wall, we were then handed over to an ex-Republican prisoner. He had not committed any offence, but had been interred for a number of years at the age of 18. He thought he was part of an IRA, and he probably was. And he took us around the other part of Belfast and spoke all about from you know, where houses were bombed, where families were run out, where there was horrendous difficulty, whatever. So it was very, very interesting to hear the two perspectives. But what they both said violence didn't achieve anything. And that was really, really powerful. He said, what we decided as time went on, both of them said this, the way to bring about change is we needed to have our children educated. We needed to support the education process. We needed to help our children become the politicians of tomorrow. And he said, that's what's actually worked. It's been sitting around the table. It's trying to get agreement. And yes, you know, people from a generation could only do what they did. They didn't have the education, they didn't have the opportunities, and so they were violent. They tried to win a war. Whereas what actually brought about change was when there is more education, when there is more awareness, when there is opportunity to come together to discuss and then to find agreement. So yeah, you know, I think it's not just about being generational, it's about what happens when you move from one generation to the other and the opportunities that come with that.
Thanks, Tony. I want to maybe take two final questions before we kind of draw to a conclusion. But the first one I'm going to turn to is probably more of a comment, but just when you were mentioning prisoners there, and maybe in a different context, but we obviously have someone in our audience tonight who knows a fair bit about prisons, and that's Brian Gowans, who's with us. And he mentioned that he found prisons were great institutions in tackling sectarianism. And I wondered if that was something you'd encountered at all yourself.
Well, I'm sure it is, because there's a community in the prison, and it's a bit like, you know, you can't, I'd imagine you can't escape your fellow prisoners, particularly if you're on a long sentence. And so you might find that, you know, coming in to prison, there might be this kind of rivalry, but at some stage along the way, there's things that people do together, whether they're in education experiences together, whether they're in kind of work experiences together, whether in just social aspects together. And through time, there's a new identity comes. So, you know, you might have somebody from the Catholic community, someone from, you know, Protestant community, yeah, they'll be seen as rivals, but through time, they're sharing activity. And so there's a new dynamic begins to emerge, a new dynamic of some unity there. And that's, you know, I'm sure if the prison, you know, service understands that, and I'm sure it does, and Brian's got huge experience in that, but kind of capitalising that and providing opportunities for people to come together, as they've done in Northern Ireland. They bring young people together. As our priest and our minister did, they brought boys together in the Boys' Brigade. So, you know, that creating opportunity for unity is important. And I was going to say in my final slide, I've got time to just, that the slide that I've passed over was that I ran a residential school for children with social, emotional, behavioural challenges for many years. And there was an experience where we had two kids who came in, two boys from Glasgow, and one was Celtic, one was Rangers. And they continually had fights with each other for, you know, it was horrendous, on the roofs and doing all sorts of stuff, just totally over the top. And one of our staff members proposed a plan, and we had single rooms and we had twin rooms. And this staff member had proposed this plan. Why don't we put these two boys in the same bedroom? And initially we thought, no way whatsoever. But we thought, well, let's have a go with this. Nothing else was working. And we spoke to them both about it, and they both laughed and whatever else. And they said, well, one boy said, I want the room kind of painted in Celtic colours. And the other one said, I want the room painted in Rangers colours. So he said, well, how about if we paint one half in Rangers and one half in Celtic? How would that do? So eventually they agreed to that. And they were together. Now, it wasn't without its difficulties, but again, something happened in that. There was something happened when they came together and they had to live together. It was then very interesting at parents' nights. We used to have kind of proms and things, and we used to have prize giving. Both those lads had come from, you know, pretty difficult backgrounds, and their parents and the fathers, you know, very much Protestant, very much Catholic, Celtic, Rangers. The boys through time didn't have a difficulty. They'd started to work together. But see, when we had parents' nights and they were coming together, and those two families were coming, they were not happy. They were not happy at all. So that showed, you know, where some of the influences were. So I think for me, it's that whole thing about unity and diversity, and it happens right across the board. If we can respect the other for who they are, and we are respected for who we are, and we find something in common, that's the way forward.
I'm going to turn, Tony, just conscious of time, to one final comment, and it's one I'd have plenty to say about myself, but I'm going to hand over to you straight away because it's about our Catholic schools. And I'm just going to read the comment verbatim to you and ask you to respond. So the comment says, I struggle with the issue of Catholic schools and what part, if any, they play in division in communities, particularly in the west of Scotland, where children are separated both educationally and socially at the age of 5, often from friends they have spent time with in nurseries.
Yeah, well, I think that's a you know, a well kind of shared argument, and it's a difficult one, because we know that for our young people, nurturing them in the faith, particularly in primary school, is really important. When we move into secondary, I think our secondary schools have lots of challenges in terms of maintaining a Catholic ethos and whatever else, but our primary schools we've always kind of held really tightly to, and that they were important for the work. But yeah, I mean, what are the messages we give? It goes back to, you know, what subliminal messages did I get from my dad about being a Catholic and other people being Protestant? It's that same thing. So if we do put children in different schools, then of course that's going to happen. Perhaps in more recent times, when local authorities have been planning provision, where they've looked at joint campuses, that perhaps has been a way of trying to deal with that, so that children from both schools can still spend time together and have some degree of unity, but then have their own kind of focus. And I suppose if I was asked from my own personal view, it's not necessarily the church's view, but my own personal view would be development of shared campuses is probably better. I wouldn't go full tilt to let's do away with Catholic schools, because I think they have a huge value, and it's important for us there. But if we are thinking about our responsibility for bringing about change, if local authorities have got to look at their responsibility, as does Education Scotland and whatever else, then all of that's got to be taken into account. So it's not just about giving up what we might have and hold as valuable, but how do we look at opportunities to bring together and share? And I know that some joint campuses can be difficult. Others have worked really, really well, where there is that opportunity to bring all children together as one.
Thank you very much, Tony. And probably worth noting as well, kind of the Scottish Government research that you referred to yourself talks about the fact that Catholic schools don't have a direct impact on sectarianism, which is an interesting comment as well. But Tony, thank you very much for our conversation. Thank you for sharing with us tonight and for offering us your expertise. I'm going to hand back over now to Marion.
Thanks.
Goodness me, what a discussion. Thank you so much, Father Tony. That was brilliant. Thank you, Callum, and thank you to all of you who contributed to that very good discussion. I think that we may have to return to this at some time in 2023, because it's such a big subject and people had so many valuable comments and valuable questions. So that's something that we will keep on the agenda, and we might call on you again, Father Tony. So thank you so much. And thank you, as I say, to all of you who have made this a very special AGM, a very special occasion. Welcome again to Anne, to the Executive Committee, and please, all of you, just stick with us as we go forward and help us to seek the peace and non-violence that we aim to do as an organisation. And now I would turn again to Father John for our closing prayer, if I can do that.
Thank you, Marion. And we'd just like to close with a very simple Celtic night prayer. The God of life with guarding hold us. The loving Christ with guarding fold us. The Holy Spirit guarding mold us. Each night of life to aid enfold us. Each day and night of life uphold us. May God shield us. May God fill us. May God keep us, and may God watch us. May God bring us this night to the nearness of God's love. The peace of the God of joy, the peace of the Christ of hope, the peace of the Spirit of grace, the peace of all peace be ours this night. And may Almighty God keep us, watch us, and look over us. And may he bless each one of us in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. And once again, thank you. We are so lucky to have you and the Severians as our chaplaincy. That was a wonderful way to close our meeting. I thank you, Father John. I thank all of you. Thank Father Tony once again. Enjoy the rest of your evening and stick with us and make Pax Christi Scotland successful in 2023. Thank you and good night. Thanks.